microphones on. They'll tell us when we are ready and being recorded and those type of things, and then we'll be going. Nick, would you mind bringing that up? All right, we will call this meeting to order of the Executive Committee of the South Carolina High School League. And as we begin, I appreciate you all being in attendance. We'll ask if our Vice President, Mr. Cave, will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ask you to remain standing, and Mr. Pearson, lead us in a word of prayer.
We bow our heads. Most gracious and Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportune time to serve the students of the state of South Carolina. We pray that you continue to give us knowledge and wisdom as we continue to make decisions that best interest the students in this great state. We pray that you do everything in your son Christ's name going in order. We pray safe travels and travel back to our soon destination. In these things we pray and give thanks. Amen. Amen.
Thank you all very much. This is one of our regular scheduled meetings. We'll be seeing a lot of each other in January. It's a busy time on a realignment year. First order of business, though, is you all have had a copy of the minutes from the last meeting, and I would entertain either a motion to approve, or if we've seen something that needs to be amended, that as well.
Motion to approve.
I have a motion from Dr. Green to approve the minutes. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Mr. Cave. All in favor, if you'll raise your right hand. Any opposed?
0.
All right. Next item is a request from South Carolina Athletic Coaches Association to make a request and appeal. Are they those representatives here? Great. Show them in.
This morning we have Ms. Cindy Jacobs from the South Carolina Athletic Coaches Association.
Welcome. Before we begin, I need to read the following statement. In accordance with the Freedom of Information Act, the High School League posted and provided notices of this hearing in the stated agenda. Copy of the notice will be attached to the minutes of this meeting. Pursuant to South Carolina Code Section 3460, every meeting of all public bodies shall be open to the public unless one of the criteria delineated in South Carolina Code annotated 3470 is at issue, unless the facts and evidence presented in this appeal involve any discussion of employment, appointment, compensation, promotion, demotion, or release of an employee, a student or person regulated by a public body, or the appointment of a person to a public office. This hearing shall proceed in public view of those in attendance at this public hearing. At this time, do you wish to proceed in open session or closed session?
Open.
Thank you very much. The appeals process will proceed pursuant to the rules and regulations outlined in the bylaws of the South Carolina High School League, found on pages 1 and 2 of the bylaws. Although this is not exactly an appeal, it's more of a request. I guess before proceeding, can you briefly restate the reason and your specific requests for the committee?
Yes, sir. And thank you to the board and Dr. Singleton for allowing us to do this. We are requesting that we move, that you allow to move the closed week, because right now it is open during the South Carolina Athletic Coaches Association Clinic. So that's why we're here today.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. Finally, are there any members of the executive committee who believe they would need to recuse themselves from this appeal? Seeing none, if there are no questions by the school or, by the committee members or the Coaches Association, you can go ahead and present your request and appeal at this time. If you'll limit your presentation to 10 minutes to allow us for questions and discussion, you may begin.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for giving us this time again. And you're probably thinking, well, where in the world is Coach Scott Early, being the executive person for the South Carolina athletic coaches? Well, he's actually on a plane going to a national convention for coaches, and he has sent me. My name is Cindy Jacobs. I have worked for the South Carolina Athletic Coaches Association for probably 30 years. I worked for Coach Keith Richardson, Coach Shell Dula, but my real job is in a school, just like you. I work for Lawrence 56 for Dr. David O'Shiel, superintendent. So as you know, we are here to ask for the closed season to be moved to the days of our clinic. We believe that our clinic is that important. We don't want our coaches to have to decide to come to sessions that they need or stay in practice, because we all know what a coach would decide, stay in practice with their students. We think that it's important that they attend the sessions that we have, and it's a great time for them to work and build relationships with our college coaches and able to get our student scholarships and play on the next level. When you do a clinic, you have to have it booked several years ahead of time for your hotels and everything to work right. Coach Dula had booked it all the way through 2025. We try to stay 2 to 3 years ahead to get the prices. We have talked to the hotels and asked in the convention center to ask if it could be changed. It cannot be changed. We are locked in a contract. So we took the next step. We polled 229, and you can see in your handout. We polled the coaches of 229 schools and asked if they were like option A, option B, or we gave them the option C, keep it like it is. Option A will break it down that closed week will be 22nd through 24th, and then the 31st and the 1st. Option B would be closed the 22nd, the 23rd, 29th through the 1st. Our clinic will start on the 21st, and usually it goes through the 24th. But we're willing to make adjustments on that Wednesday that the coaches that coach fall sports would not have to be there. And then option C was 29th through the 1st is right there what it is now. As you can see, we polled 229 and we had returned 141 responses. As you know, every time you send an email, sometimes it gets in the spam, or sometimes they hadn't had time to check it. 65.7% chose option A. Option B was 28.6. Option C, that was 5.7% that says leave it like it is. In over the 30 years, we've never had an open week during the clinic. We're asking for a one-time change that the closed week would be during the clinic, and in the future, we will look far enough ahead, and I know that Scott, Coach Early is even looking at maybe moving some of the clinic on a weekend that it doesn't interfere. Because we think it's important that our coaches still have family time and have times to be with their family. So in the end, we're just asking if you would allow the high school league and we work really close with them because they're at the clinic also doing sessions for our coaches, and time for our coaches to talk to them about the rules, and rules of change. It's just a good time to be there. Please consider to change it this one time. We've looked in the years, next year, the year after, that it shouldn't be a problem. Thank you, and I will answer questions.
Okay, Ms. Jacobs, thank you so much. Do you feel you have had enough time to present all the necessary information for your appeal?
Yes, sir.
Great. We will open the floor for questions. Dr. List.
Thank you. My question is really not about it's twofold. Number one, when we can answer it, have we had discussions with the commissioner in terms of the future dates and for coordination, in terms of how that would work now? And secondly, if in either one of these proposals, I guess my question is a little bit different. Why wouldn't you just, if you're going to take that week, why wouldn't that whole week be closed? You do a complete week and then start the next week. Why would you split the 2 weeks? What was the rationale? I mean, I'm not married to any of it. I'm just asking.
We were told, and I'm not sure if I have the terminology right, that it has to be a buffer week or something, a buffer days before practice. We're fine taking that whole first week. It's clearer. But that's up to Dr. Singleton.
I'm sure you want to speak to some of those options, maybe how it would affect, from your perspective, the state in general, but also that specific question for us.
Yes, so we've been consistent with the week that we've used every year for the closed week. Again, they're asking that, basically what they're asking is to be closed during the period where they have their clinic, for the obvious reason that Ms. Jacobs has shared. I think anytime we move away from what we're doing consistently, it lends itself opportunity for violation. We've been having violations with it even where it is. So I think the best opportunity is to not move what we already have, but if there's an opportunity to close to allow the clinic to exist, then that works. So my suggestion, or my professional opinion, is that if you're going to offer an opportunity, it's those 2 days that they're asking for, but don't address the closed week. Leave that in place. That way, less opportunity for it to be violated because people are just used to having what they have. And I think they've got that listed as an option B.
Ms. Jacobs, guys, am I correct, just listen to you, the leadership of the association is not necessarily tied, it didn't sound like, strongly to option A or B. It's more presenting just the information of the majority of schools who responded to your poll. They indicated that, but that you'd be comfortable with either option A or B from y'all's perspective, because both would allow your clinic to do what you need it to do.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Because I know just from my perspective as a building principal, having that week before 4th of July has become a consistent way for both our coaches to kind of plan vacations around, our athletes kind of plan vacations around, in our facilities. We do some kind of a deep clean kind of things, knowing that July 4th is there, some of those things that just need an extended time, even after you're finished, to dry or whatever. There's a lot, at least at my school, built around that week. But adding the 2 days wouldn't impact us either way. But I just wanted to make sure that I understood that.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Other questions? Is it, for other principals, just curious if the question goes to those, or athletic directors, having 2 days on 2 different weeks would limit my school's kind of ability to do some of those things, either for those family vacations that people have, whether that's athletes or coaches, but also for some of that facility cleaning that we do. Does that impact anybody else in a way that makes option B a better one besides me, or is that just curious on that?
I mean, I'd like to say that if, Mr. President, in looking at this, I know it's not ideal, but for a one-year span, my question is, being a part of this organization as well and representing it, I know how big that it is. And I know a lot of the football stuff is tied to that Wednesday. I guess just in my opinion, in looking at it, we are just talking about for 1 year. I would take into deep consideration as to what the poll has led us to see. That's a lot of schools involved, 140, Ms. Jacobs, 141. And I get the reasoning for the other, and I don't disagree with that. But I do think for one period of time and being able to get it out, I think I could, obviously I could support any, but being a part of the organization and knowing it, I know how huge it is, and I know how hard it is to change with coaches coming in and speaking and those different things. Even on the 24th, we're not doing it on the 24th. I know that would make some huge changes, and I don't know how that works with the college coaches coming in and being able to speak and those different things. So those are just some things to consider. Obviously, I could support any, but that would just be my thinking for option A.
Ms. Jacobs, do you think along those lines, because he's a part of it that way, do you think the Wednesday option B would have a major impact, or do you think y'all have already kind of figured out how to handle that without it being a major impact?
We have already figured out how we think we can make it work, and we will go with either option you decide, but we can make the Wednesday work.
Okay. With a severe negative impact, or not really?
No, sir.
Okay.
So I would like to add, as a past board member of the Coach Association, is knowing the planning piece and how everything is structured. I echo what Coach Bird, David just stated with option A. Obviously, the clinic is currently built to reflect this week, to reflect going through the 24th. And while I understand they have a plan to still make it work, in my opinion, just knowing the planning that goes into everything that clinic entails for all parties involved, that Wednesday, while they have flexibility, probably still needs to remain. And I just believe that those that have responded to the poll, the polling also suggests that option A would be a direction that they would like to see things go, while I would support A or B because of what the membership they have been able to receive responses from. I would support option A.
On that number, how many, you polled 229?
Yes, sir.
How many do we have? Is that the full membership?
I thought the full membership was 221. Some of them you may have done may have been duplicates.
Yes, sir,
But
we probably
of
did.
those that responded, 80 schools are not represented, which is at least 1/3 of the population. And it doesn't give any sharing to it at all. So I appreciate all that comes along with it. But you do have 80 schools that are not represented in the poll at all. So of those that responded, 65%, which is actually 91 schools that voted in favor of it, which is less than half of the entire membership that selected A. So I go back to, and again, the challenge we have is that we have violations in town. We make a lot of changes. That's the only thing I want to be sure that we take that in consideration, that we make changes where we split weeks up, allow it. There may be opportunities for violation consistency-wise. all we would be doing is adding some time to it, for consistency. And that's one of the things that they, of course, which was an option that was presented to them. So, good with any way to come away with it, to share those numbers.
Commissioner Singer, elaborate on what you said, the option that was presented, when you said adding some additional time. I'm gonna get some
Well,
clarification.
so in option B does not do anything to the proposed week as we normally have it. What it does is it adds 2 more days of where we will have, like, the closed season. So that creates less frustration, well, even the schools that haven't even responded, because they know what they know is already in place. Those that did respond had an opportunity to see all of them, of which 41 of them know that what we have in place is still in place, and they're getting they're asking for an additional 2 days of closed season for what we have. For consistency purposes, that comes to our office, I think it gives us less opportunities for violations to occur than if we were to take that week of 8 and say, well, 2 days is okay, and then 2 days is not. That's inconsistent with what we have across the board.
Other questions?
And just one, but couldn't we potentially have violations on the 22nd and 23rd? I mean, I think when you look at it, you could have violations both ways.
Absolutely, that's what I'm saying, but for consistency purposes, we didn't move a week that we already had. So right now, if we spent the time, if the belief is from the membership that those people are gonna be at clinics, the likelihood of violating is gonna be much less, because they'll be at the clinic. We just, we would hope that the membership, our office will be willing to do it. We'd hope that the association also puts out, consistently, that those days ought to be closed, especially since they sent out the survey. That if whatever's granted, that they mass produce it and, or send it out to the media, just saying these days are closed, reminder. I think the more often they hear it, the better. That's the
And we
only
will.
reason
Other questions? Or a motion if no other questions?
I'd like to make a motion, we accept option A.
I have a motion from Mr. Byrd to grant their request for altering the closed week and using their option A, which would break the closed week up into 2 different weeks. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Cave. All right. For discussion.
I'd just like to say my reason for that is I respect all opinions, and I know it's not an easy thing. There again, just taking the information, the most of what we've had from the schools that were polled, and taking that along with knowing that with the organization, knowing that however splitting it could make some of those things, but I think leaving it the other way could as well. If this is what's presented by them, knowing what they have to do, I think it would be our job to get that out, and that organization to get that out to make sure that's not done for 1 year. So that's my thinking on it.
Any other discussion? If not, we have a motion and a second to grant the request using option A, breaking it into 2 different weeks. We'll go ahead and vote then. If you're in favor of the motion, in favor of option A, please raise your right hand.
16,
Any opposed?
1.
All right. What that means, Ms. Jacobs, is that your request has been granted and using option A.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. You have a wonderful day.
You too.
All right, next we'll be receiving subcommittee reports. First up will be legislative as we prepare for the Legislative Assembly in March. Traditionally, what we would be doing today is hearing recommendations from the subcommittee on whether or not the Executive Committee supports or does not support each of these proposals that have been done by the membership. These bear no weight other than providing the membership the opportunity to see whether or not it's supported by the Executive Committee. It doesn't vote anything down. It doesn't make anything happen. This has just been, over the years, proven useful to the membership to know how this body feels about those and whether or not we support those, and we have the opportunity to ask the league staff for clarifications on the Constitution, bylaws, how it might impact, and us also to have discussion. And so I will turn over to the subcommittee, legislative subcommittee, for their report.
Thank you, President Warren. Good morning. The legislative subcommittee had the opportunity to meet twice to overview the proposed changes. So we will review each one and talk through our rationale, and we'll share if it was recommended or not recommended to the executive committee. So the first is Article 5 membership submitted by Josh Trahan from Fox Creek High School. The proposed change is to add language that the high school league would create an auditing body comprised of individuals proficient in PowerSchool data collection software to consist of school counselors and registrars to validate school enrollment data, with the rationale that the Constitution would create a body responsible for analyzing the data submitted. Our group did discuss this proposal, and while feeling strongly about the auditing process and the need to validate data, particularly related to the new multiplier system being implemented, we did vote to not recommend this particular policy because not all schools in the league use PowerSchool for one reason, and also because we think that this could be a potential priority for the upcoming school year. There were just some additional questions. How would the counselors get access? What's the rate of compensation? What are some of the procedural pieces related to this policy? What would we do with private schools? Are there other ways to verify the data? And so the vote did carry 7-0 to not recommend.
All right. So we have Article 5, Section 3, amendment by Fox Creek, which was recommended out of subcommittee not recommended. Are there any questions for the subcommittee or clarification sought? If not, we will vote now on what you'll be voting on is they do not recommend this one, so a vote in favor will be also not recommending if there's no questions for them or clarification. All right, at this time we'll vote. If you are in agreement that this is not a proposal recommended by the executive committee, raise your right hand.
17,
Any opposed?
0.
Ms. Lang?
Thank you. The next is Article 5 on membership, submitted by Josh Trahan from Fox Creek High School. This is proposing that the number of students in the league assigned attendance zone with an additional 3 multiplier would only represent students participating in league-governed athletics. So this proposal is stating that the multiplier would only impact student athletes. That's the wording related to this. Our subcommittee did discuss and appreciate the intent of wanting to only include athletes in consideration for all enrollment information, but did see some risks of schools limiting the number of athletes they would allow to participate on a team to control their enrollment numbers. And so we did see some negative impact potential for student athletes not being able to participate because schools could potentially try to control how many students were on each team to control their enrollment. We did also discuss that this proposal would need some more consideration for logistics, like terms and what constitutes an athlete, which is not defined in this particular policy. So the motion was to not recommend, and it carried 7-0.
All right, so that was not recommended from the subcommittee and passed 7-0. Are there any questions or clarification sought from them or league staff on it? And I did have one for the Commissioner right off the bat. Commissioner, if this were to pass by the membership, would that immediately go into effect and alter the current realignment and cause that to have to be kind of, for lack of a better term, started from scratch almost? Or if that were to be passed at Legislative Assembly?
It would, unless you clarify it, it probably would.
Because he didn't, am I correct? I didn't read anywhere, and I don't know if y'all saw that. It doesn't say anything about 26.
Right, yeah. Unless you clarify it, it would impact what next year's realignment should be.
Any other questions or clarifications needed? Hearing none, a vote in favor of this motion from the subcommittee would be to not recommend that this amendment move forward. So if there's no clarification, thought, or questions, we'll vote. If you vote in favor of their recommendation not to recommend it, raise your right hand. Any opposed?
I'll abstain.
All right.
Thank you.
That does not pass, was not recommended by the executive committee. Move on to the next one. Ms. Lang.
The next is also in Article 5, Section 3A, submitted by Josh Trahan from Fox Creek High School. This has similar language in that it would only take consideration to athletes. However, it does have a change that says enrollment figures will be based on the number of students in the league assigned attendance zone with an additional 2 multiplier on students participating in league-governed athletics who reside outside of the attendance zone. So this request is to consider athletes only and lower the multiplier to 2. We did discuss, the subcommittee made a motion not to recommend, the vote was 6-0, for the same rationale as the policy above, and to allow at least 1 year cycle with the approved multiplier system to see through the appeals process and those decisions.
Thank you very much. So they have a recommendation that we not recommend this to be passed. Are there any clarification questions or anything for the subcommittee or league staff? Seeing none, we will vote. We have a recommendation from the subcommittee not to recommend this amendment submitted by Fox Creek High School, Section 3A. If you are in favor of that motion, if you'll raise your right hand.
17.
Any opposed?
0.
All right.
So the beauty of that is if the intent is going to be on the next realignment time, and if the concern is what the impact would be if it was passed this time, is they still have time to do it. They could submit it next year for consideration for the next realignment time. If that could answer some of those questions. If the thoughts are, it may impact what we currently have.
Ms. Lake?
This next one is submitted by Dr. McMillan from Spartanburg High School. This is adding additional language under Article 6 for administration related to meetings. Under Section B, it adds two items, that executive committee meetings shall be based on the following: at the discretion of the president of the executive committee, at the request of any 5 members of the high school league executive committee. If this occurs, the high school league office would work to secure a meeting date that is acceptable for all parties, and 24-hour notice must be given to any meeting to comply with FOIA. This process is already in place here at the league. We, as the subcommittee discussed, we did have one concern particularly with this policy. In section B, between 1 and 2, there is not the word or, so at the discretion of the president of the executive committee or at the request of any 5 members of the South Carolina High School League. And that was something that we did have a concern about related to this particular language, because currently it is an or, either or. We know that the author is the only party that can amend. We cannot amend this policy as written. So the motion was not to recommend 7-0.
All right, we have a motion out of subcommittee not to recommend this proposal by Spartanburg High School, 7-0. And Ms. Lang, for clarification, primarily on that the or might lend confusion or actually change some of the fundamental meaning of
Correct.
that. Mayor. Any other clarification questions?
So, this body has the authority to edit. If there's a way to take what currently in the bylaw and constitution and doesn't change the interpretation, this body has the authority to kind of rewrite a clarification. It appears that what he's asking for is a more clarification than what we have. So this body can decide to figure out if there's a better way to say it. We can do that. We can edit it and say that. I think one of the things that drew some confusion from the author was the thought was that if 5 committee members agreed to hear an appeal, that the meeting will occur with just those 5 members, that there has to still be a quorum. And I spoke with the author just as late as yesterday, that even though 5 committee members said they'll hear it, it will carry the same weight as if the president said it. But we still have to follow the process of getting a quorum of members to be able to have the meeting The meeting will be, will happen, but we have to establish a quorum, and that's where the part where it says we'll work with all parties on an acceptable date, meaning that we're going to create a quorum, which will be, of the 18, we have to have at least 10 that's willing, that can get there before the next meeting, before the next regular scheduled meeting. But this body has the authority, if there's a better way to word it, and if directed by the executive committee for my staff and I to do that, we can bring something back to you. And it doesn't require going to a vote, because it's already clear that what they're trying to do is clarification.
We did discuss that in the subcommittee as well.
Was y'all's or y'all may not have gotten to that point, but was y'all's recommendation that the league staff review it to see if there was a way to clarify?
We did not discuss that specific. We did discuss requiring that there's a quorum, and that would be a minimum of 10 members, correct?
Right, yeah, and based on the committee numbers that we have currently. If that changes, then that number changes.
Sure. And adding the or, we did discuss that. Those are the two.
My recommendation would be to review and bring back to us suggestion for clarification. Any other questions or clarification? We'll still vote on this because they put that, and they totally have the opportunity to proceed with that. So right now, the subcommittee has put it forward 7-0 not to recommend for the reasons that were discussed. So we will vote on that. If you are in favor of not recommending that this, as it currently reads, you're not recommending that to be passed, please raise your right hand.
17,
Any opposed?
0.
All right, Ms. Lang?
Thank you. The next two proposals are on a similar topic, and so in subcommittee, we did make the decision, we'd like to present these together with consideration prior to making a motion, if that's allowed. And they are related to voting. The first one is submitted by Mrs. Kathy Hip, and it is changing our current policy, which says that each classification will be permitted one vote for each 1,000 students represented by the class, to, and it's listed in B in her section, each member high school will designate one delegate, each of whom will have one vote. The rationale for this proposal states, regardless of the population in the school or classification, each member high school only fields one varsity team per sport. Allowing one vote per school enables every member to have an equitable voice regardless of size. Our subcommittee would like to recommend this for discussion. We recommended this 6-0 to discuss today. Also, in conjunction with that is the following proposal. And this was created by, let me get my notes together, by the Legislative Process Review Committee that was formed in August of 2022, where a principal and athletic director from each classification were selected to meet through April of 2023 to just establish equal voting throughout the classifications. I believe that was a league priority 2 years ago. And this proposal is on the same topic, and it is recommending that 7 delegates are representative of each geographic district, and that rather than voting by classification as it is currently, we would vote based on the districts outlined in section B of that chart. Multiple classifications would be represented within each area. And so we did feel that it was important to discuss both prior to voting, and have both in context, if possible. And the subcommittee did say that the motion to recommend for the second policy by the committee was to recommend 6-0 as well. We did want to hear some discussion on this. The second policy has a stronger vetting process for submitting proposals for change, and has the districts designed by SCHSL. They're kind of two different thoughts on the voting representation method. So,
Clarification, Ms. Ling, on the first proposal, y'all did not come to a recommendation or not a recommendation. Y'all recommended for discussion. Is that
both.
correct?
We recommended both
For both
for
of them.
discussion.
So neither of them, do you have a recommendation coming out as far as we decided we recommended or not recommended?
We voted 6-0 to discuss both.
Okay. All right. What we'll do, just the only different in procedure that I believe this would cause is it's not, when we vote on whether this committee recommends or not, we'll need a motion and a second from this committee, since we're not getting it out of subcommittee one way or the other. Other than that,
Thank you.
we now are able to discuss. We could ask the legislative subcommittee, or on its face, we have one of the authors here on our committee. And so, any questions or discussion? Commissioner, history-wise, do you remember the Blackville Hilda Palmetto Scholars proposal? What the response was from the membership when that was first proposed, or any discussions that you had at that time, or if it got that far? Because I think that is part of what was recommended out of a subcommittee or a priority. Yes.
In fact, Mr. Jackson served on that committee. He could probably better serve us in sharing what their thoughts were. But they did reach out. Each one of them continually reached out the entire time to their classification. There was representation from each class. And they did reach out to their classification and get feedback on each one of those.
Mr. Jackson?
Thank you so much. The purpose of that subcommittee was to look at how we are arriving at legislative balance in the discussion and or voting upon items
that come before the Legislative Assembly. All classifications were represented. The dialogue between the committee members and the classification was robust. We each went back and had conversations within our classifications about how this might provide a little bit more legislative balance towards addressing those items that the membership feels as though warrants a change in bylaw and or policy. So out of this came a new structure that was a priority of the executive committee prior to my arrival to look at doing this a little bit differently. As it currently reads, there's a little bit of an imbalance at the upper tier of our classifications as it relates to voting compared to the lower classifications. And so this proposal is an attempt at addressing that, transferring the structures into districts. Each of those districts are represented across the classifications. The vetting power comes out of that district, presents it back to the structures that are in place, and eventually it makes its way to the legislative delegation in March or April, whenever it is that we meet. So it was comprehensive in terms of what was developed. It was discussed across classifications and down into the ranks, and it received support all the way back up to its current proposal.
Thank you. Other questions?
Mr. President, just a clarifying question.
Yes, Dr.
Just,
Lamb.
I don't know if there's an answer to this question yet. With the new enrollment numbers being utilized for region or for classification placement in the legislative assembly process, the number that will be used based on each region will not include the multiplier. Is that correct? Let me clarify that. It wouldn't be a multiplier number.
Ms. Lane, did y'all have discussion, or it may be obvious, and I see it, when y'all were talking about and wanting to discuss these at the same time, does one cancel the other out? Is that y'all's opinion?
Yes.
Ms. Hitt, I guess the Crescent one, and then to summarize it, is one school, one vote. Would sum it up.
Yes, and really that's based on, one, simplicity. It's easy to understand. When upper classifications have more voting power than lower classifications, there's, I think, of eligibility and transfer rules specifically. There's a lot of power there, and how transfers for athletes from say a 5A school to a 2A school, there's some things put in place by those bodies that I think protect 5A but hurts 2A. An example may be, say, a person transfers and it doesn't fall within eligibility from a 5A high school and they played JV, but they transfer to me, or let's say played varsity but never played. And they transfer to us and by rule maybe would have to sit out a year or play sub-varsity, but actually could really contribute and be a part of the varsity team. It didn't hurt 5A that they transferred, but there's a rule in place that protects 5A, in my opinion. And that's just one example. And it goes back to varsity football is varsity football. So why does a 5A team have more voting power than a 2A team or a 1A team on issues that affect it? Did that clarify our perspective? The other, quite simply, is that it's very cumbersome the way it reads. And there's lots of room for, while I know it's been vetted by committees and I'm sure lawyers, there's lots of details in there that are still cumbersome. And I think that's the gist of that's part of the problem with the way it's done now.
Thank you. Other questions or discussion?
You know, I would agree with Ms. Hipp that the second proposal is very comprehensive. You know, quite honestly, as I look at it, I'm not as sharp as you guys. I said I'm going to have to study this for a little while so I can really, really digest all that is entailed I agree with the goals of both of the proposals to try and provide greater voice to smaller schools. I'm just not sure, and I'll just say myself, that I would be prepared to make a decision today without a little further study. I you know, obviously, Ms. Hip has given lots of attention to her proposal, and so has the other body. But I would almost, and I'm not even sure if Commissioner Rowley is appropriate, to even table those two proposals until we've had an opportunity to maybe study them a little more in detail. I'm not sure that, yeah.
Yeah. This body has no decision-making power on whether it passes or not.
Okay.
What comes from this body is basically an opinion
Okay.
on whether they support it or not. The passing of it or the failure of it resides with the legislative delegates that will review it and have an opportunity to vet it, where every school will have an opportunity to kind of digest it and speak about it. There'll be some of the things that'll be discussed during the classification meetings, and they will direct their delegates. For lack of better, this group, this basically has the ability to give an opinion as to whether they support it. When I present it to the membership and I share what the opinion of the executive committee was, I make it clear to them that they had limited opportunities to actually review it, to you know, digest every piece of it, to ask all the questions of it. And because of the time that we're limited, we don't get them until the end of the year. And then when they come in, then I try to speak with the authors, or my staff do, to try to craft it to where it could be understood. And then we get it to the exec committee for review and address. So they understand that your vote is an opinion at best, and it's not always a deep dive into what it is unless they were the author of it. So I would suggest you don't table it, just give an opinion on it and let it be vetted through the membership of the group that's gonna vote.
I spoke from the perspective of a school superintendent. I would also just, and I added this perspective to the committee, in being a superintendent from the former state superintendent, Molly Spearman, and now Ellen Weaver, I've heard both of them make comments, especially Molly because she's been at longer, that some of the policies of the high school league do not seem student friendly. And I think most of those are related to eligibility issues. And I think it's a more straightforward process that regardless of your size, and lots of times size has to do with your demographics and poverty, it would give more of a voice for every child. Because I think the perception that the high school league is not pro-children, and I said perception, I didn't say that was truth, that is something we've got to change across the state, especially in the legislature.
And so, Kathy, I guess, you know, obviously we're looking at two different proposals. First of all, and I think it's important for us to acknowledge that the league simply enforces the will of the body. Okay, and so when people even have the perception that the league is not student friendly, then we are the league. And that would suggest that JR isn't student friendly. Fairfield County Schools isn't student friendly. So I think we need to separate this whole idea that the league is somehow separate from the people who make up the league. We are the league, all right? And so the league is only enforcing the will of the body. My other point, I guess I'd like to get clarification, Kathy, is how do you think this proposal whether we go with yours or the other, creates a perception that the league is more student-friendly. I mean, 'cause I would push back on that as well, particularly for people who are engaged in working with young people, to suggest that they aren't friendly to those young people. But how does this proposal create or maybe mitigate the perception that the league is not student-friendly?
Maybe I used a bad choice of words, okay? I'm simply, let me say, the policies that the league is enforcing are not student-friendly. And I'll go to comments in a superintendent's meeting, or maybe in one of our committee meetings with Molly Spearman, when observing appeals based on eligibility. If you watch some of those appeals and seeing what some students are put through to plead their case, it appears the league is not student-friendly, is not trying to err on the side of the child. Now, I will say, all the league is doing is enforcing the league's policies. But the league's policies are not going to change until the votes are on a level playing field. Now, that's one opinion based on 8 years being around superintendents groups, watching this group, watching the legislatures. I simply think that if somebody looks at what I do as a part of this body and says you're not being student-friendly, we at least should think about that and see if our policies are appearing that way, because we are only enforcing what the will of the body is. But the will of this body will never change until the voting process changes at the Legislative Assembly. Take that as Kathy Hipp's opinion.
I think it's a good time and opportunity, though, for us. I think you bring up some good points with perception right now, but I think it's incumbent, and I don't know how many people watch us or will watch the recording, but it's always good, I think, good opportunity to, some of the things you mentioned, to talk to the body and the principals, and a couple of things you mentioned. I don't think there's any child who's ever been required to come here and be a part of that process without a principal who thought that was a good thing for the child. I don't think the league's ever required it, and I don't think our body's ever required it. I think a lot of communication can help with the public. It can help with legislatures. It can help with people who don't deal with the administration of high school sports, and so they don't understand as much. If we help communicate to them, even when it's our own school that we're frustrated with because maybe we've had to forfeit something, maybe we made a mistake, maybe a coach made a mistake, maybe there's a problem, maybe there's a kid who transferred who we would really like to be able to play for us, but they can't because there's a rule. To be able to communicate to everyone else who's upset as the principal, to make sure they understand no one's not being unfriendly to kids. We're in sports, and there's winners and losers. There's competitive issues. There's reasons for all these rules that were common sense, kid-friendly reasons, and they can be changed and still be common sense and kid-friendly reasons. They're not right or wrong things. They're what we have now for good reasons, and we could change the Legislative Assembly, and we could change all of our transfer rules and all of our eligibility rules, and we would have a new group of people who were very upset and giving the impression to others that we were not kid-friendly because a senior who had been a starter at quarterback for 3 years was just transplanted by a sophomore from another school who may or may not have moved, but felt that that was a better opportunity. That senior quarterback wasn't as good, so I'm going to switch schools because my school doesn't have as good an opportunity to win. There's all kinds of reasons. There's a whole bunch of reasons and a whole bunch of rules, and nobody that, at least that I've seen, was writing them arbitrarily because they just thought it'd be nice to have. All these things in the administration of sports are very complicated, and I think it's a good discussion that was brought up and a good opportunity that we as school employees, every chance we get, make sure that legislatures understand, that our community members, our parents who are upset, everybody involved, that however we do a realignment or however we do a transfer rule or however we vote the Legislative Assembly is not kid unfriendly. It's just trying to maintain a fair and balanced approach to high school sports, and there's disagreements on that. And while we might disagree, any changes that might be made, there'd be others who would disagree and who would feel the exact same and differently than they do now. I think that's good. I think communication is a very important, especially right now, that we communicate with a lot of people about why things are done, perspectives different than ourselves, and the motivations behind that. Sorry for that little.
Can I just add one last thing here? Look, I'm a school superintendent. I have to follow board policy. I understand consistency in making unpopular decisions. But I also know of situations where lots of things are done in the name of children transferring to schools that are not quite ethical to meet eligibility requirements. Not in my district, because people don't come to us to play big sports. But I think to pretend that, well, I'm simply going to say when the majority of the appeals that our group does not support goes to the appellate committee and gets overruled, tells me we need to find a way to look at some of our policies. And the voting method has not been very good to change policies. I just presented a different one. I want to make it clear that in subcommittee, I didn't vote on either one of these, and I will not vote on either one of these today because I think that's a conflict of interest in my role sitting in this chair. But the groups I represent have asked me to present this standpoint, and it comes from a local and a statewide level. So I won't speak on either other topic from this point.
Mr. President,
Mr. Jackson?
I just want to offer one more explanation. The democratic process has always involved selecting representatives or delegates. Mrs. Hipp represents a school district that's governed by a board, a group of people who are elected to write policy for that district. The proposal that's coming forward from the legislative subcommittee does just that. It elects delegates from districts to represent the will of the membership. It does the exact same thing. I told Mrs. Hipp in subcommittee that I believe in the power of one school, one vote. I told her that. But I'm also splintered because I was a part of this group that really focused on trying to look at it differently. So the proposal that Mr. Commissioner, Dr. Singleton asked me to speak upon, I left the piece out that it does mirror the democratic process, that we elect delegates, representatives to help with legislative matters on our behalf. So I just wanted to offer that up as an additional explanation.
Any other question or discussion?
Just out of curiosity, and Ms. Hipp, you don't have to answer it, but I'm curious, even though you have a separate proposal, do you support the counter proposal that Mr. Jackson spoke to? It's just in the event that, and obviously we don't have final say, both of them try to achieve, I think, the same thing.
I would say this proposal is a step in the right direction. I still think it's cumbersome. And I still think it doesn't get at the heart of the matter that every child in every school is represented. But I do think it's better, yes.
And I just ask one final question, and that's to Mr. Jackson or Ms. Hipp. If we truly feel as if the voices of particular smaller schools are not to the extent that they should be, and this goes to the legislative assembly process, why is there confidence that it would be approved there? You finally, and I mean, if the thinking is that that the people who have the biggest voice will determine whether their voice is smaller, why is the suggestion that they would then vote to make their voices smaller? If that is the thing.
I don't expect the Legislative Assembly to approve this if it comes out of our committee. But if we don't lobby for it and the question doesn't get put on the table, then it will continue to be the same way.
Yes, Ms. Lang?
I could add to that also, subcommittee did discuss the thought that schools in like areas and regions may have similar interests, and that would be potentially appealing with the second proposal.
Could you say that again?
That schools that are located near each other in similar regions would maybe have similar things going on and have similar interests, and that would be appealing to vote together in that way.
And you're saying that is a hopeful reason that perhaps that one would pass
Correct.
through, okay.
And we acknowledge that the other has been submitted in the past and not gone through.
All right, if there's no other questions or discussion, we need to entertain a motion to recommend or not recommend for the proposal from Crescent High School. And do I have a motion to recommend or not recommend? And again, this will just provide, as Dr. Singleton expressed, an opinion for the membership, but does not have any weight as far as doesn't pass or stop anything from passing.
So Ms. Warren, just for clarification, and I guess theoretically we could, but it would seem to be a conflict for us to as a body to recommend both of those.
But we could.
But we could.
We could.
Yeah.
It means, in my interpretation, if I were just a principal getting that, I'd be like, well, they're saying either one of those is better than what we got right now. And if that was what the executive committee chose, I think that's how most people would interpret
I make a,
it. So, Dr. Listen.
Just a comment on a couple of things there. This is not a flash in the pan issue. This issue has been around for a long, long, long time. Back to even when I can remember when I worked with 2A and been in 3A and 1A. It comes up recurring. It's a recurring issue. It's interesting when you can argue for both sides, right? You can argue that, hey, you've got representation because you have more students. And then the other side is some of the issues that I think have been important to some of the lower classifications through the years, maybe they were specific to them, could not pass, not because 5 and 4A were necessarily against it. If I remember, it's just when it doesn't affect you, sometimes it's not as important. Not intentionally, but that's just kind of if it doesn't affect me, then it might not take on the same level of importance. It doesn't matter what classification it is. So the irony of having a discussion about this and trying to vote on it is the whole issue that you're trying to work against is going to be the issue when you get to the Legislative Assembly. The weighting of votes is still there on the issue. It's still going to come down to what 5A and 4A choose to do. I mean, so all I wanted to say is I appreciate both of the proposals in that I wish that there could be a dialogue, but outside of that dialogue with 5A and 4A, it will not happen. It just will not happen. Because if they choose for it not to happen, it doesn't stand on the merits or what we think. It will stand on where 5A and 4A. So all I would ask is, it's not even a motion, as in the discussion part, is that folks in 5A and 4A continue to be aware that this is an issue that has been long-standing. I'm not into the issues of eligibility, and I'm not speaking to any of those things that Kathy spoke to a minute ago. I'm going to say that. But I am saying it has been out there for a long time. So, again, I can argue that a proportional vote, that's fair. You know, I can also argue that it's important. There are things in smaller areas that also may affect them that may not affect the larger school. I could give you examples. Today is not the time. But again, I just want to say that it is important to continue to consider that and not just to sweep it under the rug. So I probably won't vote either way. I'm going to abstain because I don't want it to appear that this was my only option when 5A and 4A. My challenge is to simply to continue to look at the issue. So I just want to share that as in the bigger picture.
Oh,
I'd like to
sir.
make a motion
Yes, sir.
that we accept Ms. Hipp's proposal.
That we recommend it.
We recommend it.
I have a motion from
Sorry.
Mr. Byrd that we recommend the proposal from Crescent High School. Do I have a second?
Second that.
A second from Dr. Barfield. All right. Any more discussion before we vote?
I'd just like to add, we as a executive committee body really focus on competitive balance. We should work hard at that. We should, at the very least, send a strong notion of support for the idea of legislative balance. And I would encourage us as an executive committee to do that. And either supporting either one of these, I think, mistakes.
And just to echo that, that's my thing. I think just because it's not there, and like Dr. Liston said, the potential for it to get voted down, I think you still have to continue to do it. I think we still have to continue to push the issue. We did it with the competitive balance, and this seems to me to be fair play with moving that direction as well. So that was my purpose in it.
Any other discussion?
You know, probably the only thing I'd say, to speak to what Dr. Barfield alluded to, we did spend quite a bit of energy with competitive balance. And I think we came up with a solution, whether people agree or disagree. But it was definitely explored and well thought out, and was not really just done by happenstance. I think regardless of what happens with the vote here or at the assembly, it may be valuable to spend that same kind of energy looking at legislative balance. You know, I'll just tell you, for me, I'm gonna support it just because I want it to go to the body. But particularly looking at, I'm gonna support the second one as well because I want it to go to the body. But I think we probably, as an executive committee, probably need to spend the same level of time and energy really studying this issue as well. Okay. Because I'll tell you that I think it can become can be pretty complicated, and you want to make sure that there aren't any unintended consequences when you end up making a decision. As Dr. Liston said, you can have an argument on both sides of that, and some people will say that the way we elect our people to the House of Representatives, where Texas gets a lot more than South Carolina, isn't fair, and then others will say, well, it isn't fair that South Carolina get 2 senators and Texas get 2 senators. So, you know, reasonable people can obviously take a position, and I'm not sure whether there's a right or wrong on it, but I think it still does warrant at least going to the body. Thank you.
All right. If there's no further discussion, we'll vote. We've got a motion to recommend this and a second. If you are in favor of recommending the proposal from Crescent High School, raise your right hand. Any opposed?
1.
All right. That is recommended. Now we'll go to the second, which is, I'm just going to, for brevity purpose, Blackville Hilda proposal. Same thing. We need to either hear more discussions or questions, or we are need a motion to recommend or not recommend the Blackville Hilda proposal. Mr. Blackwell?
Commissioner, I'd like to make a recommendation that we approve, recommend this Blackville Hilda. Simple reason, the other proposal, I believe for, or either one of them have changed. Just to give them a little more, as a colleague said over here, competitive balance that we've been working on. This right here, it states there'll be 5 districts, and then all classifications will be represented through the first 5 votes of the 7 delegates that they have sent. So that's getting a lot closer than we are now. I mean, itself. So whether they have 2 more delegates, you don't know where they might come from. And as you look across from there, I mean, they're mixed with smaller schools as well as large. So I think, it can kind of help get it closer, but we just got to get a little direction. So my proposal is, we recommend this, right here.
All right, we have a motion to recommend. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Dr. Lanford. Any discussion?
So just to be clear, this body, while there's some new members on there, made this proposal that you just suggested a priority. That means this body had the opportunity to vet it and discuss it throughout the process. Each classification has a representative, so it was shared in the classifications also. I took the opportunity when we had superintendent's meeting to bring that forward before them too, to make them aware that this body was pursuing, looking at another way to do the voting. So it's not one that this body didn't decide they want to take a deep dive into it. If they want to continue to do it or take a deeper dive, that can happen. But every group was made aware of it and had an opportunity to give input on it because it was a priority for this body. And was brought back to this body on multiple times, updates of where it was.
And for clarification purposes, this is the first opportunity that that body has had to actually put that before the membership, correct? Because it wasn't last year that they finished their work, am I a year off?
They were updated throughout the process.
Right, yes. This will be the first time the product's been able to be voted.
I think that you, because I think they had an opportunity to look at it in this way.
Yes. Okay. All right, we have a motion and a second to recommend. If there's no further, yes, sir?
Yes, Mr. President. In the legislative committee, we discussed this at length, and one of the things that stands out to me, if we're talking about legislative balance, if that's what we're trying to achieve, the problem I had was with the 5 districts. You see the different counties listed there. Each district receives 7 delegates, and like District 5 has 13, for example, 13 different counties represented. So if we're talking about legislative balance in that spirit, there are going to be several counties that just aren't represented whatsoever. It's not enough. So that was my concern with that. I appreciate the intent and the spirit behind the proposal, but this still leaves a large room for error where some of the smaller schools, some of the smaller counties, they're lumped into, say, District 5, and District 4 for that matter, they're not going to be represented.
If no further discussion, a vote in favor will be to recommend this from Blackwell Hilda as a recommended proposal. If you are in favor, if you will, raise your right hand.
$15.
Any opposed?
Sorry, I must have missed you 2 on the end. I'll look past you all.
We'll try that one more time.
Can we vote again? Yes,
Yeah.
please.
All right, if you raise your right hand, a vote for a vote in favor to recommend this.
13.
Any opposed?
2.
All right. Moving on. Ms. Lang?
Thank you. The next one is submitted by President Warren. This is bylaws Article 2, classifications in regions. It's an addition to say combination of schools are not applicable in sports where a student may be able to participate as an individual and represent the school he or she is attending, with the rationale, while the schools may not have enough participants to create a team, the student is still eligible to compete as an individual at the school he or she is attending. The subcommittee did discuss and unanimously recommended to approve 7-0.
All right, we have a recommendation from the subcommittee to approve 7-0. Any questions, clarifying, or discussion?
Just wanted to note, there's currently no language about it in our bylaws, so this is just an addition.
Just out of curiosity, do we not currently allow that?
Currently do allow it, and this would not allow it in those, I'll give an example would be swim. Yeah, there's several. They're rattling them off. Golf.
Golf, those sports of where you're able to participate as an individual would be the ones that you would be restricted from doing combination of schools. Combination of schools would be reserved for those sports where you need to have an entire team of multiple athletes to be able to compete. So, and currently, I think those sports would be golf, swim, cross-country, track. Did I miss any?
Wrestling, tennis,
Well,
wrestling.
wrestling probably needs a team in order to have a regular season. Most schools won't get a dual meet and only having one or two wrestlers. So they probably need to be part of a team. But in most cases, when you have open competition, like in cross country, you can have as many of them as you want. Track, you can have as many of them as you want. Golf, you can have as many of them as you want. Swim, it just, what it does, and I've spoken with Arthur, what it does is that it prevents being able to just pick up one or two athletes and make your team special. Where one or two athletes makes all the difference in the world. So it doesn't deny the athlete the opportunity to compete. It just becomes incumbent upon the school to be able to provide that opportunity for the kid to do it. And those are the only sports that I think would be affected. When we talk about basketball or soccer or baseball, those sports that lacrosse and the like, then I think it needs to still be open for the membership to make a decision on. What this does is this makes it clear that you can have a team, so there's no need to have a combination.
Any further questions or clarification on that?
Most schools, most competition have multiple schools to come in and be a part of that golf, whatever event that they'll have, just as in track. You're invited. You can come and be a part of it. It doesn't prohibit you because you don't have a team. A lot of them participate as individuals. Actually, at the state championship level, we actually recognize the top golfer, who may not be part of a team.
Yeah, that I realize. I was just thinking, like, when Somerville plays the best action, that's two teams playing. So aren't most of the, and I don't know myself, aren't most of the matches at that level done that way? Doesn't team A play team B, team split? Isn't that the way most of the regular?
In some cases, in some of them, they do what you would call compete for a region championship. So most times they try to do as much head-to-head as they have. But there are multiple opportunities for tournaments where they get the opportunity to be a part of it. And that's not isolated to just golf.
All right. If no further questions or clarification, we have a recommendation from the subcommittee to recommend this proposal. The vote in favor is to recommend it. If you are in favor, please raise your right hand.
17,
Any opposed?
0.
So some of the pushback on that will probably be, that's one more coach I gotta try to find for one kid. Or I've gotta figure out how to do it for one more kid, so it's in the best interest of kids, then we'll figure out how to do it. If it's for convenience, then we'll figure out other ways to get it done. An example is swim, getting pool time. The league has made concessions on that, where two schools can be there practicing at the same time as long as they're not doing the same drill at the same time. And the league has even made it clear that you could be under the same coach, but you're recognized as separate schools. And that avoids the ringer from coming in and being able to get the points for a selected school without compromising the opportunity for the kids. So that'll be some of the pushback that'll come from.
Ms. Lang?
Thank you. The next one is submitted by Paul Prescott from Dixie High School. This is for bylaws Article 2, classifications and regions. This is centered around championships. It currently reads legal sponsor championship in each classification that has a minimum of 12 of its schools with teams participating. If the requirement's not met, but a minimum of 14 schools with teams in adjoining classifications participate in a sport with majority of the number coming from the higher classification, they'll sponsor a combined state championship. The proposed change states that the league would sponsor a championship in each classification that has a minimum of 8 of its schools with teams participating if the requirement's not met, but a minimum of 10 with teams adjoining for the combined classification. The rationale is centered primarily around 1A schools, and it states that the requiring a minimum of 12 teams to sponsor a state championship has been detrimental to schools in Class A. Schools combined with higher classifications to compete has made it more difficult for Class A to meet the current requirements to qualify for a championship. The subcommittee did discuss, it was at length. We had the original motion was to recommend, and the vote was 3-4, so that vote did not carry the motion to recommend. The discussion centered around the subcommittee included topics like the number 8 seeming to be too low, that lowering to 8 teams may not be truly representative of the size of the state, because that sometimes can be similar to the size of a region, and there would be a need for more teams to constitute a state championship. We also discussed options for having an invitational for the end of the year hosted by the classifications in some of those circumstances rather than a state championship. And the subcommittee did recommend that this could be a potential priority for the upcoming year as something for us to evaluate and take a look at.
All right. They voted 3-4 or 4-3 not to recommend from subcommittee. Any questions or discussion for this?
And just for clarification, currently as an example, if there were only 8, say 1A teams that fielded soccer, they would just compete with 2A for the championship. So they still compete, they just compete for 2A, with 2A. Okay.
If no further questions, a vote in favor of this is a vote not to recommend the Dixie High School proposal. All right, if you will, raise your right hand if you agree with the subcommittee and vote not to recommend. Any opposed?
3.
All right. This is not recommended. Ms. Lang?
Thank you. This next one is proposed by Commissioner Singleton, and it is bylaws Article 3, student eligibility. This proposal adds, in order to participate in athletic activities for the high school league, a student must be enrolled in and attending a member school or associate member school. Each student eligibility file must include a waiver by the student and family to provide student data to the league in any cases where it is required to determine eligibility They must agree in order to be eligible to participate in the athletics activities. The student must also meet other necessary requirements of all sections in this article. We, the subcommittee discussed and we recommended this to approve 7-0, with the rationale to allow the league, to help the league gain access to Power School information to determine eligibility. If eligibility is in question, the league really should have the ability to look into a student's academic record.
Great. Any questions or clarification? The subcommittee, we have a recommendation, proposal to them to recommend this that passed 7-0. Dr. Barker?
A question.
Sure.
To the commission, then I feel I understand,
So, actually, what presented this was we have a school that, we would like to review their academic requirements for kid eligibility. We've been informed that not all the students were eligible academically. The school cites, FERPA as a reason of them not having to share that information. They would have to get, a waiver from the school or from the parents of the student before they can share that with us. They've been able to to get some of them and not all of them. So we're not able to review their academic information based on what they say. Well, and actually, it probably needs to extend into medical also, depending on a condition that a kid may have. We require that you have a physical. So the physical should be open, viewable by the group that's making the requirement. So what it does is it ties it to them. If it requires a release form, they're doing that on the front end. In the event it needs to be reviewed.
Administratively, will all athletes have to sign a waiver form, or just the one who's?
Yeah, right, yes. It'll be part of when they do parent permission forms and everything else, and pre-participation form, we just create a form that they just sign that one along with it at the beginning.
What if a family or student is not signed?
And that's why it states, in order to be eligible to participate, you have to do that. Ironically, the history has been, we have gone into schools and reviewed all records. We had, in the recent past, contracted with several former principals, athletic directors to go and audit our schools. And some of you may remember when that was occurring. And they would go in, and each student, it says a school has to have all this on file, where they kept it in folders, and those groups were able to view all of them. We just, as of late, ran up on a situation where a school is saying that may be in violation of FERPA. So if they don't get the waiver, they don't feel they should have to share the information. So this kind of clarifies and gets it on the front end, while there's no names and faces attached, that it can be addressed in the event it comes up.
Mr. Hires?
And Mr. President, just kind of to reiterate the importance of having this in place, if there does become a question of eligibility academic-wise, the State Department of Education, their hands are tied as well due to FERPA without a parent's permission. So in the event that an investigation does need to occur, where there are students that are ineligible, right now the league is sitting kind of dead in the water. They don't have any recourse, but this would provide for fairness and for student safety, with the HIPAA included as well. So that's where that stands.
Any other question or discussion? All right, this was recommended out of subcommittee 7-0. If you vote in favor, it is that we would recommend the proposal from the league. All in favor, if you would, raise your right hand.
16,
Any opposed?
0.
Ms. Lang?
Thank you. The next proposal was submitted by Greer Middle College or Greer Middle High. It's bylaws Article 3 for student eligibility. Currently reads, a student must be enrolled in the school at which he or she practices or participates except homeschool students and or governor school students subject to certain conditions are eligible at the public school attendance zone of their residence. Governor school students subject to certain conditions are eligible at the public school in attendance zone of which the governor school physical plants are located. This adds language about non-member private school students. This change proposes a student must be enrolled in the school at which he or she practices or participates except non-member private school students, homeschool students, and or charter school students, and or governor school students subject to certain conditions are eligible. The rationale is student athletes who attend a non-member private school should be afforded the opportunity to have a chance at participation in a sport that is not offered at the non-membered private school. The motion from the subcommittee was to recommend, the vote was 4-3. It was split. We did want to note state law currently already includes homeschooled students and charter school students are already included in this. So this policy primarily, exclusively is about non-membered private school students.
All right, we have a motion for the subcommittee to recommend 4-3, the proposal from Greer Middle High. Any questions or clarification on this?
Okay, one thing you gotta be mindful of, this body would be treating private and charter schools differently if this passes, because this is exclusive for public schools in the attendance zone where the student lives. Does not speak to being eligible at the private and or charter school in the attendance zone where they live. So it would be challenging the proviso as written, which says that this membership has to treat all of them equally. So you go back to the question of the homeschooler and the charter schooler that's allowed to do it. That's state legislated to this body. This was not a decision made by this body. So recognize, I just want to put in front of you that this passing goes in defiance or conflict with the current proviso. Again, this body, when I say this body, I'm talking about the league membership, if it passes. This body can pass it, and it still doesn't carry any weight until the legislative body passes it.
Dr. Singleton, isn't there a lot of dialogue about this happening, though, from the state?
For years. It's not new. I mean, the past couple of years, they've been having that conversation. In fact, it's not in its, I haven't seen it in a final form of where they all are in agreement. I think the last discussion was the size of the private school, what grade level they were going to allow to do it, all those things. Whether that private school had athletic programs or not, all those things were part of the discussion they've had over the years in trying to address that.
Anybody on the legislative subcommittee who did not vote to recommend, who felt like they could provide some clarification as to why they did not, or that'd be useful?
You know, while we are all supportive of school choice, my personal heartburn is, if it were in reverse, would I be eligible to participate? If I'm a public school student seeking to participate on a private school team, would I be allowed to do so? That's where my heartburn is, personally. Mr. Commissioner gives a pretty grounded reason why we shouldn't do this. But from a personal standpoint, that's why I couldn't support it.
Dr. Liston.
One question for the gentleman in the room that represents the private schools. Do you have how do you feel about this, or how do you think the private schools would feel about this?
I'm intention about it. I see the point. It'd be hard for me to support this for that. But I have heard non-member private schools are lobbying, arguing they should have that opportunity. And while I respect that other things, sometimes we make those decisions. And it's just a complex issue.
Thank you. And again, my only comment would be, it's going to be difficult for me to support something that I know is against the proviso that exists. It also, the unintended consequence of this could be, I'm just going to put the cards on the table. You're coming over to play lacrosse with us. While you're over here, would you also like to play tennis with us? Or would you, and again, recruiting the student back into the public school, that's crossing a line where an institution, you made a choice of where you're going to go. And the consequence is, when you make that choice, it feels like you know what they offer, and you're there for that intent purpose. So to me, because it goes against the proviso, and it does blur the line for me in terms of perhaps recruiting that student over unintentionally, but if that student's good enough, I think it gives grounds for some bad feelings between and you can say, well, that could happen in the public setting, but it feels like the intentional decision that someone makes knowing that they're going that route separates that, and it goes against the proviso. So I would not support it. I don't know. I'm not saying I wouldn't support the decision. I'm just saying I don't support this. I don't know how that ferrets out for a plus or minus with the motion.
Yes, Ms. Lang?
I have a question. I noticed in the proposed language, it does not include language that states that it would be participation in a sport that is not offered at their non-membered private school. It states that in the rationale, but it does not state that particularly in the proposed language. But it also does not state that, I don't believe, directly in the current language. I would have to pull the full bylaws. Is the language in a paragraph prior that alludes to that, or would that be required? Would that language need to be listed in this paragraph to state that they would have only be eligible for participation in a sport that is not currently offered?
Yeah, if that's the intent of the author, then we could recognize it because of the rationale that the author submitted, if that's what the intent is. We would just wordsmith it so that it does, does clear.
Okay, thank you. I think that language would have to be added.
I was one that did vote against this in committee, and my reasoning behind doing so was it's far-fetched, but it certainly is possible for these non-member private schools. Private schools, they do offer scholarships to those students that are in need, and perhaps they're in a certain attendance zone, and they could be recruited actually to that private school to play for the public school if they don't offer those. But that could be a slippery slope. I'm saying, yeah, that's a lot of trouble to go to get a student athlete, but it's been done before. Certainly with the homeschooling as well. When you look at the situation in Ohio a few years ago with the Bishop Sycamore, that entire fiasco, where they had what they considered homeschooling or online schooling at a hotel, but they were eligible to play for a school. And I think this kind of opens up Pandora's box, if we were to recommend this. I mean, there are nefarious folks out there, they're few and far between, but this would open up a loophole for more recruiting without being subject to the 3.0 multiplier.
You know, Dr. Liston, and I have heard in just having some conversations with some people who've been weighing in on this issue, so I don't know it to be factual, is that several members of SCHSL are not supportive of the proposal. And so you asked Dr. Barfield how private schools felt about it. Once again, I have heard, and I don't know it to be a fact, but that they are not supportive of the proposal. For obvious reasons. Okay, obviously, once something like that passes, then obviously it can go the other way, where now public schools are poaching their athletes because they aren't necessarily as competitive. But then finally, I'll say I agree with what Ms. Jackson said, is that if we truly think that we should provide these opportunities for all athletes, then it should go both ways, okay? And so if we are saying that because XYZ private school didn't offer tennis, then the private school students should be able to come to the public school and play tennis. I think conversely, if the public school doesn't offer lacrosse and the private school does, then the private school should make an opportunity available for those public school students, which I think would be consistent with the proviso if it were treating all students the same. So for that reason, I would find it hard to support this proposal.
Any other questions or discussion?
Could, Dr. Warren, could someone who supports this speak?
Sure, absolutely.
And it goes back to a couple of comments made. If you watch the ad hoc committee meetings that happened this fall, there's a strong lobby for this, much stronger than I've seen in the past. And the key question I heard them ask is, homeschool students are afforded this opportunity. Why are we not? And I spoke in favor of it at the last committee meeting because I do believe it's going to come. It's one of those areas where, again, our policies appear to exclude a group, and those groups asking for it, the sport is not offered at their school. I think that I think it would be hard to, and maybe we can make an argument that there's going to be in some of these schools a sport offered at a private school that our school is not offering for a kid to go the other way. Now, I do agree that if there is one there, that same opportunity should be provided. But there's a strong lobby for this, and once again, this seems to be the one group excluded, because if homeschoolers were not included, it would be easier to support not recommending this. But there are provisions for homeschoolers to play in the high school league sports.
I think, just Monty says, Mr. Jackson had a great point. But I think this may make an argument for, not that it's in our power to do so, homeschool students should not be allowed to participate, but that ship sailed. Dr. Green, do any of your high schools offer lacrosse?
No.
So not one student at that school has the opportunity to play school-based lacrosse. And no one's doing any rule to exclude or fighting for them to not be excluded. I don't think we're in a situation where we're excluding a group. I think there's just schools that offer sports and don't. And then the legislature has stepped in and changed some things for charter and home. This is a proposal to change again with this for the private school, but at least in my opinion, it's not about excluding or not. It's whether or not the legislature made a wise decision in the first place or not. But that, again, that ship sailed. But I think once again, there's just perspectives. But I don't think anybody's trying to exclude a group any more than somehow Dr. Green's excluding his kids by not somehow figuring out a way to have lacrosse. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. valid. I mean, there's different perspectives on it, but I don't know.
Well, Ms. Wall, let me just speak to what Ms. Hipp said, because I was at several of those subcommittee hearings that she was at when there were several non-member private school students there. And they were consistent, because I had conversations with them after the meeting, that they agree that it should go both ways. And not simply that private school students should be able to pay at the public school if those sports aren't offered, but they also agree that public school students should be able to play at the private school if that sport is not offered. So the devil is in the details. So where we may agree theoretically, this bill doesn't accomplish that. Or this proposal does not accomplish that. So I'm going to get back to what this proposal does, and this proposal doesn't do that. This proposal allows private school students to play at public schools, but it doesn't allow public school students to play at private school for sports not offered, nor do we have the authority to do so. Okay, we have no authority to tell a private school, you need to allow my kid to play lacrosse there. All right? So while we may agree theoretically, this proposal can't accomplish, nor do I feel we have the authority to do so, accomplish what you outlined you'd like to see.
Any further questions or discussion? So just to make sure we understand, a vote in favor will be to recommend. So if you would like to recommend this proposal from Greer Middle High, that is a vote in favor. So if you would like to vote in favor, if you would, raise your right hand.
1,
Any opposed?
15,
All right, that is not recommended. Ms. Lang?
Thank you. The next proposal is bylaws Article 3, student eligibility, Section 10, submitted by Josh Trahan from Fox Creek High School. This is related to transfers. The recommendation and proposal states a student will be permitted a one-time transfer to another high school with no eligibility restrictions as long as that move occurs before the first day of school for the new school year. The one-time transfer only applies for the student's 10th and 11th grade years. A student may be ineligible for a period of 1 calendar year at the new school unless he or she transfers under one of the following 2 criteria, irrespective of whether he or she moves under one of the circumstances set forth in subsections A through N. So the rationale for this is to allow any student school choice with eligibility on the first day of school and the opportunity for a one-time transfer over the course of the first 3 years of high school. This change would eliminate the need to dig into the rationale for student transfers. And it says, in many of those cases, the details can be very personal and difficult to explain to the committee. Subsections A through N would still exist for specific cases falling outside of the beginning of the school year. The motion from the subcommittee was to not recommend. The vote was 5-2. The opinion of the subcommittee discussion included items like this could potentially open the door to recruitment or too many transfers and vulnerability within the documentation of the transfer system was identified.
All right, we have a recommendation. We have a motion not to recommend 5-2 from the subcommittee, the Fox Creek High School proposal. Any questions, clarification, or discussion? Hearing none, a vote in favor would be not to recommend this proposal. If you would, raise your right hand if you are in favor of not recommending. Any opposed?
3,
All right, and that is not recommended. Ms. Lang?
The next proposal was also submitted by President Warren. It is under bylaws, Article 4, School Regulations, Section 8. This is in addition, and it is related to forfeitures and contracts. Regions are required to establish contracts for all region contests that are used to qualify for state playoffs. Forfeiture clauses must include a monetary consideration not to exceed $10,000. Competing schools with agreement may choose to waive the forfeiture clause. In absence of a contract and schools not agreeing to waive the forfeiture clause, the league will determine the monetary consideration for forfeitures with the rationale that schools are placed in a region to ensure a regular season schedule. Written contracts help to create an enforceable remedy if a school chose to forfeit a contest. The subcommittee made a motion to recommend, and it was unanimous, 7-0. We did state that it provides language to act to ensure contests.
Okay, we have a motion from the subcommittee, 7-0, to recommend this. Are there any questions, clarifications, or discussion?
Is there anything with extreme circumstances tied to this that would cause that to happen? I guess that's my biggest tie-up with it. Just in a situation where I know that I would work with a school, we would work with a school in any capacity. Let's say that you didn't get that from your neighboring school. Is there any thought on what would be considered, or would that be left to the league's discretion and Dr. Singleton?
And my proposal would be left to the league. One of the reasons for narrowing that just to regions was that there'd be less often when, if it's qualifying for playoffs, typically in my experience, you're figuring something out to play that game for the region because you need it, and it'd be unusual.
And I support it. I guess my only drawback is if there is an extreme circumstance.
I would assume also that could be written into the contract between the two schools ahead of time, because we're not mandating what contracts you use. Yeah, act of God stuff, things like that, but.
And that's something that the league would back on that?
Wouldn't require the league, because the two schools will enter into agreement on what they will agree to. Only thing the league will do is enforce what the two schools agreed to, where they don't get to make an agreement, and then one of them decides, well, I don't like it, so I'm not gonna do it. It gets it taken care of on the front end before there's any issues. And then they spell out any potential issues of which say, well, it's null and void if X, Y, and Z. Yeah. But it forces the two schools to have conversation. And it's only applicable to to region play where where you qualify through region play. Because outside of that, there's no issue.
So it would probably just be important to make note to put that in the language in the contract of
Yes.
extreme circumstances, or however they wanted to phrase that.
Yes.
And that was part of my reason for supporting this, is the way the language is written. It leaves the contracts, it leaves the regions open to flexibility and the two teams. And I mean, it would highly be suggested that they put, act of God or pandemic, any clauses in their actual reasons for forfeiture, but it would allow that flexibility. That's why I support it.
I have a question.
Ms. Lang?
I believe in subcommittee we established the other school would receive the money from the fine. Is that correct?
That's what the forfeiture clause means.
Who enforces the fine?
The
Would that
league does.
the league?
Yes. We enforce the contract,
You enforce the
whatever the contract says. Yeah.
Any other questions or discussion? If not, a vote in favor is to take the subcommittee's recommendation to recommend that this be passed. If you're in favor, please raise your right hand. Any opposed?
1 of 2. Put your hand up to be in favor. I'm not so Miss Phillips.
Oh, okay. I think,
You were in favor of.
this it was a,
I was recommending it.
yes. Yeah.
Okay, but you just still had it up when he asked for you.
I'm sorry.
Saw our hand go up the first time, so.
I'm either too quick or I'm too slow to take it down.
Ms. Lang?
So the vote's 15.
15, okay.
Thank you. Okay, this is our final proposed change submitted by Dr. Andrew McMillan from Spartanburg High School. This is a bylaw addition for democratic partnerships. This policy overall outlines a variety of procedures, from committees to recommendations made by the committee, how committees are created, notice of upcoming votes, how minutes are made available and collected, and things of that nature. The motion from the subcommittee is not to recommend this policy. And while we did feel that the nature of majority of the language already falls in line with processes that occur within the league, there were some concerns with Section 4. Section 4 identifies ancillary sports organizations, and there were some questions about the lack of definition of what ancillary sports organizations are, and just a little bit of a lack of clarity there as it pertains to this particular policy. So the vote was to not recommend for that particular reason. Yes, 7-0.
7-0, not to recommend, correct?
Correct.
All right. We have a motion from the subcommittee, 7-0, not to recommend the proposal from Spartanburg High School. Any questions, discussions, or clarification? Yes, sir.
That's a lot of sections that this school submitted for consideration. Was there any of these different sections that maybe the subcommittee felt strongly about opposed to others? Instead of just not recommending it all together as one whole?
I believe the function of the subcommittee is not able to modify or amend any particular policy as written, just to recommend or not recommend, but in this setting, we have the ability to do that. Correct? Is that correct? If there were something to amend or omit, any language that we wanted to consider or not for recommendation?
No, this being new, you don't have the ability to do any editing to this.
Yeah.
Your only charge or authority is what's already exists by the membership. You can't change the intent of it, but you can edit the language if it helps to clarify it more. But you can't write something to change the intent. That resides with the entire membership.
Well, and again, my question was, they submitted 6 different basic recommendations in one proposal. Is there any of those 6, instead of just saying, no, we don't support any of them, is there any of the 6 that maybe if it was just a standalone recommendation, that you felt strongly about?
But they submitted a new article, which included every section in there. So it's a brand new article that doesn't exist at all. So it is as they have written it, to include all these things that they have, for whatever reason they have. So you can't cut it up and say, well, yeah, we approve this, we approve that. You can have discussion on it, but you can't approve, you gotta approve it as a whole, because they submitted it as a brand new article.
And the author has an opportunity to resubmit at any time if they wanted to.
They have authority.
And during the discussion, Ms. Rogers, I think if you see something, sometimes the authors are watching or will watch the playback. So if you see something that you in particular think that is a good standalone and you wanted to comment on, this is an opportunity for us to talk about however we end up voting with that.
Dr. Single, but aren't most of these done in some form or fashion anyway? For the most part? I'm not.
Yeah.
In a different way?
The part of where the executive committee responds to these type of things that's done. What it does is it reaches further down when it says other committees, which means committees can be created in classifications or within regions. And if they work as part of the South Carolina High School League or in consultation with the high school league, which they will, then they become bound to all these other things that need to be done.
And I think we had something like that similar before. And our
Exactly.
question was in all our region meetings and all this, that you would have to have this information. And I guess it just become, how easy is that to get all that information for every single region and everything that's done within the state and be able to, you know, potentially have that documented with everything that goes on that would fall under the league. That's why I asked that question.
Any other questions or clarifications? Hearing none, we have a motion from subcommittee 7-0 not to recommend. If you're voting in favor of the motion, it is to not recommend this proposal from Spartanburg High School. All in favor, if you will, raise your right hand.
16,
Any opposed?
0.
All right. Any other matters from the legislative subcommittee, Ms. Lane?
Thank you. No, just the two potential priorities to consider from the executive committee were related to and some sort of auditing process or auditing body as it relates to submitting enrollment information, and then the other related to state championships for the 1A classification. Otherwise, that's it. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you, and thank subcommittee for their work. At this time, we are going to break for lunch, and when we return, we'll have activities and then personnel and finance. If you will, make sure your microphones are off.